Hello and welcome to the Integrity365 Insights Podcast. Today I'm joined by Heledd Wyn, who is a partner at Rothley Law and a specialist in a number of areas, inheritance tax planning, asset protection, care fee funding, court protection, mental capacity. There's lots and lots and lots that you're an expert in, Heledd. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. It's delighted to be on board.
Excellent, thank you. So today really is just a bit of a conversation around balancing inheritance tax planning and care fee planning. I know it's both of those areas are kind of hot topics, especially at the moment. There's lots going on in the market, lots going on with regards to changes in legislation and all that kind of lovely budget stuff. So I thought that it would be a really good conversation point just to have with an expert such as yourself, just to sort of, compare the two planning areas and sort of things that we can consider.
Yeah, and it really is, as you say, it's such a balancing act, isn't it? Because we all know we're going to die. Sorry to be miserable about this, but it is a certainty.
It is, absolutely.
And if you die with a certain amount of money, then the nice people at HMRC want their cut for inheritance tax. And so there's always that sort of spectre, isn't there, going, how do we get to a point where that is planned for and paid for? And I think the care fee funding point is much trickier because it might not happen, or if it does happen, how long is it going to go on for, and what does that look like for an individual and their wider family? And that's where having lots of conversations with people and saying, okay, well, we do tax planning, that's fine. And then we say, okay, well, how do you feel about £2,000 a week care fees for 3 years? Pardon?
Yeah, how much? Hang on.
Yeah, and I say, and I sort of go, well, as a lawyer, I can tell you what the legal position is and when you should and shouldn't be paying for care fees and how that should be sort of calculated. But if you come to pay for it, I'm out. And that's where sort of working with something like you guys is brilliant, because you can do all the sort of this is the cash flow modelling, this is your life expectancy, this is how long your money's going to run for. But I think it's hard, isn't it, to visualise something so intangible, but when it hits hard.
Well, absolutely. And I think inheritance tax especially is always one of those things that people are very, very keen not to pay. And obviously, they call it the voluntary tax because there is things you can do potentially to reduce that or negate having that tax bill in at all. But there is that fine line, and the trouble is there's lots of changes in legislation. So last year's budget, for example, which now includes, April 2027, will now include people's pensions in their estate as well, whereas previously that was excluded. So all of a sudden, this is putting a lot of people into the inheritance tax bracket who wouldn't necessarily have been in it previously. So I think it's a very sticky subject, and I think, like you say, it's a lot of people are very keen not to pay inheritance tax, but also you've got to be so careful with what you do, because if you did need it for care later on, it could be a massive issue. So for example, like gifting, a lot more people are considering gifting at the moment. So for example, if they're suddenly realizing that their pension pot is going to come into their estate in 2027, a lot more people are thinking, well, actually, maybe I'll start gifting my money away earlier than they would have necessarily thought about doing. But I guess my question to you is are a lot of people doing that? And are there any sort of common mistakes or sort of misconceptions around gifting that you want to go through?
Gifting is one of these ones, isn't it? That it's like it feels like a magic bullet, and it comes with heavy caveats. I think the classic is, I want to give away my home because I don't want to pay for care fees. And you have to explain to people going, just because you've given away your home doesn't mean you're not going to need care. They don't go hand in hand. And you have to explain to people going, well, if you've given away your home, then you don't have the funds to maybe choose the care package you want. Or if you've given away your home, that might be overturned as a decision. If you've made that decision to make that gift at a time when there is reasonable contemplation of care being on the horizon. And local authorities can and will pursue pursue these gifts and overturn them. So it can be really, really complicated to get that sort of understanding from people. Go, why are you making the gift? Can you afford the gift? Do you understand the implications of the gift and the consequences?
Absolutely, and I'm hearing a lot of that lately. A lot of people saying, "Oh, so and so down the pub," or "My mate's dad said I should put my house into trust because of the fact that if I put it into trust or I gift it to my daughter, for example, then it won't have to be used for care fee planning." And you're quite right. It's very often not the case. I mean, can you gift something that you're then living in and getting benefit from? Well, probably not, without paying market rent potentially. But B, like you say, if they are doing that at a point where potentially care is going to be needed in the not too distant future, the local authority could quite easily turn around and say, well, actually, we'll completely ignore that.
Yeah.
And that's happening more and more.
It is happening more and more. And I think the difficulty is, the conversations I'm having with people is they don't understand how care works. And we have to go back to the inception of the NHS in the sort of, post Second World War, and the NHS said if your care needs are primarily health needs, then it's free at the point of delivery. Great, fantastic, and we love the NHS. That's brilliant.
Absolutely.
Social care, which is not healthcare, was always means tested, and so that's not changed, but which side of the coin people fall on has. Things that people might have considered to be health issues are being deemed not health issues but actually social issues. So you might say, well, you've got the example I always use is, when you fall and break your leg, you get rushed to hospital, you get plaster cast or pins or whatever. That's the health bit done, tick. But you need to go back out into the community to recuperate and recover and get back on your feet, literally and figuratively. And the help you then need with maybe getting dressed or shopping or getting around the house isn't a healthcare need. And hopefully, if you're of an age where you can hobble around or you've got people around you who can help you, then I don't think anybody would really think too much about that as being, well, that's okay, I've gone home with a broken leg, thank you NHS for patching me up, but it's down to me now to get better. When you get to people who are older and more frail, who fall and break a leg and fall and have a hip broken, again, you get patched up, you then get put into the community, but actually that ability, the amount of care that's needed is more. And is that possible to be given by friends and family, or does that need more sort of one-to-one care, whether that's a care package at home or in a home, and that's where the cost comes in, if
absolutely.
you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I guess, brings me on to sort of costs at the moment for care. I mean, I think based on some information from last year, depending on whether it's at home or in a home or the different types of care needed, nursing care, etc. I mean, the costs are excruciating. They like you said, they sort of can start from 40-odd thousand pounds a year and can go up to well in excess of £100,000 a year, potentially, depending on the level of care that you need, which is a lot of money. I think compared to the average income for a pensioner, which was, again, based on a couple of years now that DWP put some information together, I think they put the average income for a pensioner worked out about £18,000 a year. So where's that shortfall going to come from? And a lot of people don't realise how much care costs until potentially the point that they need it or a family member needs it. And then it's a case of, well, where are we going to get that money from? It's really, really painful. And if you've got assets over £23,250, you're going to have to pay for it yourself.
Absolutely. And just to do a quick quick search on the internet here, and it says average care home fees if you're a self-funder per week 1,298, monthly average cost 5,192, average cost 52 weeks 67,000.
Yeah,
that's average, which means you've got either end And
Yeah,
and that we know that will depend on where you are in the country, and
of
that will
course.
depend, and we know sort of southwest, southeast England costs are higher than in north of
Yeah.
England. And yeah, compared to your pension and your income that you've saved to build, actually you're then looking at how do you subsidise that from your capital. And that for me, that's where I go, well, I'm not a financial planner, I don't do that bit. I can tell you that this is a bill, you need to pay it.
Yeah.
How will you then afford it, taking into account, and then this is where it does get complicated, and working together with advisors is incredibly helpful, because you rarely have somebody in isolation. You'll often have partners, spouses who've lived together for a long time, and historically one's been a higher earner than the other, or they've got conjoined assets, and suddenly they're sort of taken out and considered independently the person who needs care.
Yeah.
And the person who needs care is assessed as, well, you've got this much money in this, and then actually you've got a person left behind going, hang on, I've got the house to look after, I've got maintenance, and how do I manage this as well as this? And then it's making sure that both parties are their funds are looked at together and separately, of course, for the assessment purposes.
Yeah.
But actually, are there any ways of adjusting that, or should there be adjustments? Or actually, and I said actually 3 times there. When you sort of look at it and go, well, this person who's in care has a lot of money in their bank account. Is it actually theirs, or is it put in there because of tax purposes and tax planning for income tax and what have you? And then you need to start unpicking and start digging behind the scenes of understanding how this is comprised.
Well, exactly, because it's not as black and white as, oh, actually mum might need care in future, let's put all the money in dad's name, and then all of a sudden they don't have much money. It isn't, unfortunately, that black and white. It could be that the shared assets, it could be that we put everything in one particular name because of the fact that they were a non-taxpayer, whereas the other person was a taxpayer. And like you say, it isn't sort of that straightforward. You might need to sort of go back further and work out where that money came from. Did it build up from joint income? Was it primarily money came from one person? And obviously making sure that you're being as open and honest as you can do. And that's where potentially gifts can come in. And if during the financial assessment they realise that 2 years ago they had best part of £500,000 and now they've only got £40,000, that all of a sudden, where did that money go? And if some of it had been gifted, then potentially, even if it was a good few years ago, if there was still potentially a need for care at that point, they could completely ignore the fact that those gifts were made and treat it like it was the same situation.
And we hear stories about people asking for local authority funding, and then the local authority saying, well, hang on, that day centre you've been attending once a month for the last 10 years, that meant that you've reasonably contemplated the care was in.
Absolutely.
It was in contemplation, and people go, oh, and you have to ask, don't you? Given that we're all living longer, we're not necessarily living well longer. Is it reasonable to contemplate that all of us are going to need care at some point? And I flippantly said, we're not dropping down dead anymore.
No.
We're living longer, but not necessarily living well longer. And there's talk about there being a sort of, there's the 3 ages of man, isn't there? So it's childhood, adulthood, old age. There's this extreme old age piece. Yeah. And this extreme old age piece has come up and surprised people. And I say that because I've seen it in my own family as well as working with people. And I often sort of cite my mother, who's classic baby boomer and sort of retired with her lovely sort of final salary pension, and her started to become her mum's carer, my grandmother. And we were talking about it, and she said, I'm talking to all my contemporaries, and suddenly we're all looking after our parents. Yeah. And we've all realised that our parents didn't have to do that because
they weren't around that long.
The generation above or ill.
Mm.
They were ill for a few weeks and took to their bed and died. And they didn't
Yeah.
they didn't do this. And it was a real eye opener of a conversation with her. So we've all just woken up to go, oh, this came upon us quite quickly. And
yeah, well, absolutely. I think, I mean, I like it. I liken it to I call it the sandwich generation. So, you know, we've got kids of our own. Me, for example, I've got a 10-year-old that I obviously look after, and then I've got, you know, in-laws and parents potentially that need care as well. So you're sort of finding this balance between looking after young children and elderly relatives or parents at the same time. It's a tricky situation to be in.
And yeah, sandwich generations is something else again, isn't it? Because we're seeing, and again, if you know, we've talked about elderly care, but we need to look at probably also children who might be vulnerable, or learning disabilities or learning difficulties, who might not become independent, who might themselves need care in the future, and how do you cater for them as a family when they won't have any money? By and large, although, you know, junior ISAs are always a fun one at this point, when you realise that somebody's put loads of money away for somebody in a junior ISA and then they don't have capacity to access it. And then they're not going to affect on benefits. You know, this is a wrinkle that, you know, for all good intentions, junior ISAs are set up, but actually we're sitting there going, maybe it wasn't such a good idea to have money in that child's name, because there's better ways of doing it. So there's planning to be done and conversations to be had both ends of the generation.
Absolutely.
You know, parents, grandparents with children who might not themselves be independent, and what can be done to help them. And, you know, at this point, I'm going to stick a flag in the air and say trusts are a brilliant opportunity to do this for people.
Yeah, really, really good idea. Like you say, trust planning, you know, for a number of things, really. Like you say, there can be all sorts of things to putting money in trust for a child who, like you say, is unlikely to become financially independent, to make sure their money's protected. And if they are going to qualify for any benefits in the future, then that won't impact those, you know, qualifications. And then, you know, trust on the upper end of the scale, you know, before someone starts to potentially need care, but they are looking to possibly shelter some of their money from inheritance tax planning, with the caveat that they've got proper financial advice, done some cash flow modelling, and can afford to do that.
Absolutely.
Because gifting done at the right time is obviously a really good tool, and there's all sorts of different trusts and trust wrappers that can be used at the right time.
Absolutely couldn't agree more. And I think time is always the bonus. The earlier you do something, the better your chances of getting it right, getting it planned for, getting it sorted. And, you know, we can all do crisis management, but nobody enjoys that.
No.
And your options are then limited. Whereas if you can sit there and go, right, we want to roadmap the future. Let's have that conversation. Let's look at what's happening. And sometimes, you know, those conversations are, actually, we don't need to do anything just yet. Your children aren't quite old enough to need that, or we don't quite know how things are going to pan out. So let's give it a year or a couple of years. But that's equally useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
To say, actually, you don't need to do anything right now, but in 2 years, let's pick it up again and do something, because at that point we think it's going to be handy. And you mentioned, you know, the budget. Every budget is always fun, isn't it? But there's a lot of uncertainty around that at the moment, and you no doubt you'll be in the same boat. People go, "Oh, what are they going to do?" And I'm like, I don't know.
All time.
You probably know as much as I do from the news. We can think about these things. If you're going to do them anyway, you might want to do it pre-budget rather than post-budget, because if it's already on your radar and it's already feasible, why wait? But if you want to wait, if you want to know what the budget says and then react, well, we're all going to have to wait the same day. So
exactly. It's a really difficult one, and I think the trouble with changes in legislation is you can't try and second guess that, because of, you know, what happened with the pensions back last year. None of us knew that was going to happen. You know, it was absolutely, we saw that and we thought, wow, you know, there's no way I could have second guessed that. So
that was a rug pulled, wasn't it?
It really was. Yeah, it was like, oh gosh, okay. So even more speculation about the upcoming one in November this year, because we now know that actually, you know, there's nothing they can't do in theory. So there's all sorts that could be changed, but we can't really plan around changes in legislation. All we can do, like you say, if you're planning on doing something now anyway, why wait? But if obviously the only reason for doing it is because something might change with legislation, then that's not necessarily the right thing to do.
I mean, being reactive in that respect is not helpful, is it? So
No, exactly. But gifting again, I mean, I suppose the one thing I get quite often is, well, as long as I gift it 7 years before, then that's not a problem. And it's like, well, that might not be a problem for inheritance tax, but it's still potentially a problem for care fee planning. And people just see the 7-year rule as a rule for everything, and it's not. It has no impact on care fees and the financial assessments.
There is no time limit on care fees on how far back they can go.
No.
And again, that comes as a bit of a shock to people. They go, oh, for 7 years, and then that's tax. It's a nice, neat, number, but it doesn't apply to care fees, because if you've got an illness that's manageable or under control, but you've got it, then there's an argument to say possibly reasonable contemplation you are going to need care. So there's a lot of talk in the dementia world about. I saw some in the newspaper this morning went, oh, this scan can help with early diagnosis, and I was like, great, but how many people want an early diagnosis has its own consequences?
Well, it does, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you get that done in your 50s, and then all of a sudden that potentially rules out any gifting,
Yeah, because you sit there and go, well, you're living with dementia for another 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Possibly. Because the schools of thought say people with dementia have had it for 10 years before it becomes symptomatic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, actually, if you have that extra time, the consequences of that are, well, actually, that's going to trigger. Well, you've got a degenerative illness. You've got something. We all know for insurance policies, don't we? You have to disclose absolutely everything, otherwise the insurance policy is invalid. Well, the same principle goes. Yeah, doesn't it? If you like, that if you've got an illness that is going to, follow a well-worn trajectory, you need to be mindful of that and go, well, actually, we've got this overlay of this. If I'm going to make gifts, I need to be able to afford it. I need to be able to go, that is so outside what I'm ever going to need. That's fine. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what about some of the important things to consider from your perspective? I mean, obviously from my perspective, when I go and see clients, the things that I always bleat on about are lasting power of attorney documents, and that's for any age, not just mum or dad or nan and granddad. It's for any age, and also a will, and making sure that the will is done properly and you've had proper advice around it. So these are the things that my clients will always hear me bleating on about. But what about yourself? Have you got any kind of important things to consider regarding IHT and care fee plan?
I think it absolutely is. Get your will in place, get your powers of attorney in place, make sure your attorneys understand what they can do with those powers of attorney, because they are not just bits of paper. They are very powerful, important documents. Have the conversation about what does your future look like? What does your care look like? What do your care needs and requirements? What's important to you? So, the property. So powers of attorney come in two guises. There's a property and finance one, and then there's a health one. Property and finance means that your attorneys can manage your finances in line with the Medical Capacity Act and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Health one means that they can make decisions about your health. And actually, to an extent, that's a really important conversation to have, because if you've given somebody authority to make decisions about your health and you've said, I do not want any medical intervention, even if it is life-sustaining treatment, that has a consequence. So do your attorneys understand that they are being given the power to effectively switch off the life support or refuse chemotherapy, refuse blood transfusions, and that will shorten your life. Now, that will have consequences, because if you in care, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and they had a relative who'd had a massive stroke, and the conversation with the hospital had gone, well, this is as stable as this relative of yours is going to be, but they could be this stable for 5 years.
Gosh.
And the family members are like, well, they'd hate being like that. And I said, well, what conversations have been had as attorneys where do you draw the line? Where do you say, well, I would hate to live like that.
Mm,
Let us all decide to withdraw treatment, or we will let them be in this stable but not fully um, independent by a long stretch space for
mm,
5 years.
yeah.
And it was an eye opener for all of us in the conversation.
And of course, and I think not that everyone necessarily knows what those health and welfare lasting power of attorneys are for, but and quite often people will just say, well, I'll add my daughter and I'll add my son but like you say, actually having that conversation and about any preferences that you'd want to would actually really help them, because if that scenario happened and it's down to the son or daughter to potentially make that decision, if you had mum or dad's wishes, of some description written down in a legal document, it would be, I know it's obviously going to be a really difficult time, but it would be much easier knowing that that was mum or dad's wish, as opposed to you having to come up with a decision yourself and have the guilt attached to it.
Yeah,
So I
and
think it's really important.
it's really important, and I think it has to come down to open and honest conversations.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
Mm. Yeah, a lot of people are worried about talking about things. I mean, people hate talking about death, and I'm like the Grim Reaper. I'm always talking about death. I've got to talk about it for all sorts of reasons, but people hate talking about it, but actually it's so important to sit down with the family and say, okay, this is what I want, this is, what we should do, what I want to happen in this scenario, talk about the will, talk about the money, talk about, you know, just everything, really be open as much as possible,
Yeah,
and just have that conversation, because otherwise quite often it'll all be too late and something will happen, and then you've all of a sudden got to try and work it out yourself. Whereas actually if you just sat down as a family and had a conversation about everything, it would be that much easier on those people that are left to make those decisions.
absolutely. And this is none of this is easy, and I'm not saying this is easy and rosy, but it can make a huge difference
Mm.
to this, because off my sort of oft used phrase is care costs money.
Mm.
Care is going to cost somebody something,
Yeah.
and if if you are if you have no money whatsoever or very limited funds, the state will provide. The
Mm.
state will provide it its needs.
Yeah.
If you have so much money that £2,000 a week plus on care fees doesn't concern you,
Mm.
then lovely. But
Yeah.
I have yet to meet anybody who falls really firmly in either category.
Mm. Somewhere in between, usually.
It's usually somewhere in between, and that's really important to um think about and say, well, if we can get you funding through the NHS, such as NHS continuing healthcare funding, or if
Yeah.
we can make it work that you've got enough funds and everything is covered, then that's fine. And you do your cash flow modeling, and that's everybody gets what they want, and
Mm.
that's fine. But if you are in that space of going, well, you are going to need to pay for care, we aren't able to get the NHS to pay for it, or you aren't under certain other legal remits. So, for example, if you've been sectioned under Section 3 of the
Mm.
Mental Health Act, you get free aftercare. So it's always worth
Mm.
checking. And I have had clients who had two letters dated the same day, one saying this person's been sectioned under Section 3,
Mm-hmm.
and then another letter saying you will need to pay this much money. And I went, that cancels that out. So
Wow. Gosh, and the lay person would not have a clue about that. And it's similar to continuing healthcare. A lot of people don't even necessarily know what it is, let alone whether mum or dad or the friend would qualify
yeah,
for it. But if someone did qualify for continuing healthcare, then they don't have to pay for care themselves. But a lot of the time it's very hard to get that yes answer, isn't it? It's not sort of that straightforward.
it's very hard. But at the same time, if you don't ask, you don't get. And
Mhm.
if you haven't been assessed, you're definitely not going to get it. So,
No.
and you can't appeal an assessment that hasn't taken place. So often, even just that first few stages is really important.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much, Heledd. I think we've covered loads in that episode. So thank you so much for all of your insights. Obviously, if anyone's got any queries about anything, then please get in touch with us. You will also find a link to our later life planning guide and also our gifting guide below. So please take a look at those. And also we have further insights from our other independent financial advisors on our Integrity365 YouTube and Spotify channels. So thanks to Heledd so much for coming, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.